All right, controlling your bike under hard acceleration. This is going to apply more so to the 100 horsepower plus bikes. However, these techniques are relevant and useful, not techniques, but whatever, to the entirety of any bike you ever ride ever. The importance here, then the points that I'm going to be making are going to be very specific. A lot of them are going to be very specific to super sports in particular, but just keep it in mind with everything. And if the harder you're riding, the harder you're pushing your bike, the more your throttle's open, the more this stuff is still going to apply to you. Now, making this video on request, please, if you ever have any questions or want me to cover anything, ask me. That's how I get my video ideas anyway. But he said he's having issues with his bike under hard acceleration. And I will wager just about anything. What's happening is he is white-knuckling his bike, and whether he is white-knuckling it with his left hand or his right hand, to be determined, but I'll wager anything. So what happens to people, right? And what's the big thing with these ergonomics on this bike? And remember, the big thing on these kind of bikes is you have the clip-on bars, so your hips and hands are going to be dead level with each other. So you're laying over, and then you have this foot peg, right? And if you sit the way that I recommend most people to start on these things to sit, is you're going to sit nuts to tank, and your knee is going to be bent like this. You're going to be able to clamp that tank with your legs, and you're going to be able to push through the pegs with the balls of your feet. So that's going to be your stabilization. Your arms, your hands are not going to be your stabilization under hard acceleration. What happens, and what this causes a lot of issues with, especially on the older bikes, the bikes with no wheelie control, no traction control of any sort, anything of that sort, is the front end starts to get squirrely. And this is a common, very common issue with new guys on these, is once they get up to 12,000, 10,000, 11,000, 12,000 RPM, they're now at a point where they're still adding enough acceleration. The bike's deep in its power band, and it starts to lift that front wheel a little. And when you lift that front wheel, even just a little bit, just to unload that suspension, your control on that bike becomes very poor. And you risk now coming down, accidentally cutting that throttle a little, and with no steering damper, having a good old-fashioned tank slapper. So our big take homes here are going to be loose on the bars, as always. You're going to use both hands to be loose on the bars. You're not going to control it in any one way. You're not going to hold on for dear life. And I'm going to go over wrist position here in a second. But big take home, and this is, I promise this is a lot harder and a lot less intuitive than you think it is, even for guys who've ridden for a long time. If you go get on your bike and you just decide, run whatever you want to do, just hit a hard little zip up the road, what you'll notice is you're going to hold on to those bars. And when you're holding on to those bars, what happens is you inadvertently pull up on them. So if you like to sit up and you sit with a high chest, you are now pulling up on the bars, pulling up. What happens when you pull up, right? You're pulling weight up. It legitimately, under the forces that this bike is putting under you and it's putting on your body, it will begin to lift that front wheel just a little smidge more. And that little smidge more may be the difference between you unloading that suspension versus you keeping that front suspension loaded and where it should be for street purposes, really. The next thing that people do with their body position is they will sit. You got the guys that they think that these bikes were meant to be ridden all the way scooted back, right? So they sit all the way back on their seat, and I should kick this into first. So they sit all the way back on their seat, and then they lay down. I mean, just lay down on their bike. Now, this feels cool. This feels really cool. However, what happens is when your legs are all the way, your hips are all the way back there, I've completely lost the ability to push through my pegs. I cannot. Maybe if you were a really tall dude, somehow, some way, but I'm not pushing through my pegs. I'm pushing down on my pegs from this position. I don't have the foot/hip stability that I need to stick to my bike. And what happens, and someone had mentioned this on something a long time ago, and it kind of scared me to know that some people may teach this, but he was taught, what he was told was that when he's accelerating hard, he should let his body weight slide backwards on the bike. No, sir. Absolutely do not let your body weight slide backwards on the bike as you're accelerating. That will again shift weight. It's going to start unloading that front suspension even more. And under the power that these bikes make, unloading that front suspension is bad. It is not safe. Now, if, you're doing wheelies, whatever. I'm not here to judge. Talking about it from a safety perspective, from a safety and riding well on the street perspective. You don't want your front suspension unloaded ever. Big recipe for disaster, and especially if you do it on accident for the first time, like a lot of people do, and they get on an old, no steering damper, no traction control, no wheelie control, nothing bike, and that front wheel gets squirrely, and all of a sudden your handlebars are way too light. This is what happens, and this is, I think, causes a lot of the tank slappers on YouTube, or their front suspension is unloaded enough to where they hit a bump, and now the bike starts to feel like it's falling backwards on them because they're leaned over. Their front suspension is unloaded. It bounces just a little bit. They hit that little bump in the road, whatever, and that is enough to then start picking the bike up. And I think some people have a more natural tendency towards this than others. But the second you start to feel your actual body move and your sense of balance go, whoa, your immediate response is typically to cut it. And what happens? That front suspension is up, or that is unloaded. They hit that little bump. They now have that front tire probably, or they just unloaded the suspension almost fully, or they've lifted the tire completely off the ground. Their body says, hold on, this is not right. They slam it. They're death gripping their bars. They go down a little bit at an angle, and everything goes crazy. That's what causes a lot of them, and I would wager most of them actually is unloaded front suspension, a little bump in the road, death grip bars, and cutting it, just boom. So anyway, back to not doing that. Another common issue that a lot of people have, and this is something that is actually really cool to go play with, in my opinion, but it's to go out on your bike and actually feel what wrist position feels best. And if you go watch, this is something that's really cool to watch, like racers and how much variance there is in their wrist positions, and like where they hold the bars, but is just your wrist position. So what happens too with 600s in particular, because you're going to be using way more throttle to actually get where you're going, right? So on this bike right here, if I was to go to full throttle, I am now breaking my wrist. Now again, we're using these 3 fingers. That's gonna, for the ice cream cone grip enthusiast, this is gonna set your wrist in a way that just naturally happens. You have way more flex in your wrist. Anyway, if I'm to go up here, right, and I'm like I would be riding on the street, and I decide I want to full throttle this thing, I'm now going to have to break my wrist to hit that full throttle amount, okay? I'm going to have to crack my wrist. What you're going to have to do, and the roll racer guys know this very well, but you're going to be choking up on your throttle. So if you're going to go out and you're going to want to really rip it, choke up on your throttle so that at the point that thing, you have total control each way. And this is where the importance of your front brake lever is very important as well. Is if, let's say, you're set up on your bike to where, this is how you're going to be going, because this is where you'll end up. This is where you expect to end up. You need to have the clearance on your bar to where when you go forward, it doesn't catch. Because now that my hand's more forward, if this is too close to me, I can't get my finger through here, right? So if it's too close, I start, things get caught, like with these kind of gloves, anything with finger sliders, plastic on them anywhere, they can get caught and it's going to jar you, and you've caused yourself another whoopsie. So Big thing here, and another thing to note too, not a lot, but I've seen a couple things where people are big and adamant on holding your handlebars as far wide as possible, because that will mitigate the risk of a tank slapper, and it doesn't make any sense to me. So please correct me if I'm wrong here, but you're in a stronger position here, so I don't know why holding as far and wide as possible would give me, why more leverage and more ease to move the bars would make me more or less likely to get a tank slapper, versus if, you know, the way I hold my stuff is I choke up with my throttle, just feels best to me, and then over here I'm a little confused. But anyway, so that's something I've seen as advice. That's something you can find other videos on. It doesn't make sense to me, but others may be able to convince you to consider it. And yeah, that's really our basics. And I'll get out on the road here and just kind of explain what I'm doing. I'm just going to be screaming it in first the whole time. I'm not going to go break any, speed limits. Speedometers on this bike's not accurate, but I'm just going to slow down, speed up, and explain what I'm doing with my body position, as well as my hands, my wrist, and just to hopefully kind of show exactly what's happening with my hand, and better show it versus the TikTok and squid videos where people are rolling around and they have their throttle like this, and they're using their death gripping with their left hand, because this is a very common thing I see on a lot of these videos, where guys literally, they're holding it like this. They got it full knuckle, their hands completely loose, and they're like this, and they have very, very little control, and they're death white gripping over here. And to hold this like this, I'm having to pull on this bar a little bit, so things are already crooked. So if I unload that front suspension too much and I come down, I'm already going to be facing this way, and I'm going into a tank slapper. So yeah, I'm going to get up on the road. And as a little note as well, I've gone to the gym with the sheriff of my town for 10 years now, on and off at this same gym. He knows my face, he knows my bikes. I can't commit felony speeds, so I will not be speeding. My speedometer is not accurate. I will be going the pace of traffic. Please don't arrest me. And as an explanation for why I've just, no matter how much you push and prod me, I cannot go out on the streets and break the law. I don't recommend it to anyone. I'm very against it for streets, but just as an explanation as well, even for demonstration purposes. Now, onto the road I go. Down into first over here. And alright, so we'll go for the hard acceleration, right? So we'll go down to first. Alright, and then we're going to lean, and we're going to stick with our hands as best as we can. Alright, so I had almost no pressure on my hands at that point. Very, very, very little pressure on my hands. I was able to keep all of that completely on my legs, my hips, and kind of just hunch forward. I'm not laying my stomach on my tank. I prefer to sit high on my bikes, chest high as they say. That's just the way, that's how I like to ride. Okay, so we're gonna accelerate, gonna kick down gears. I'm squeezing like hell, and I accelerate hard. You are gonna have to balance a little bit with your arms, per se, but I'm probably, actually, now that I think about it, I was probably just using weight on my middle finger to kind of stick. So I was basically like this. That's all that's happening. I'm using these three fingers on my right hand to hold the throttle, and that's all I'm doing. And I hope that looks smoother than some of the hard acceleration videos you've seen. You're not having to see my body kind of jar backwards as, I peg it just to show how stable it is. My front suspension did not unload at all there. Everything stayed exactly where it should have. And, I hope this helps someone, and I hope all of this is useful to you in some way, especially the guys getting sport bikes, with, getting super sports for the first time, because the first thing you want to go do is run it up to the red line, right? You want to see what that bike feels like, and what's all the hype about. So hopefully this helps you. Any questions, anything you have anything else you have questions on, anything you want me to try and cover, discuss, please ask. I will do my best to answer it either in the comments or just in a video. So thank you.